Number 1, Joe Glynn. Jackie Glynn was 76 years old when her life came to a violent and tragic end. She was a woman who had lived through decades of joys and struggles, remembered for her quiet kindness and her devotion to her family. Friends described her as gentle and graceful, the kind of woman who always had a kind word to share. For 24 years, she had been married to her husband, Joe Glynn. To those on the outside, their marriage looked stable. After so many years together, people assumed they had weathered storms and built a lasting partnership. But beneath that surface, cracks were spreading wide. By late 2021 and into 2022, those cracks deepened. Arguments became more frequent and tensions simmered inside their Nashville home. Jackie confided to friends and family that life with Joe had grown difficult, but no one around her believed it would end the way it did. On New Year's Day in 2022, the long simmering conflict exploded. Inside the walls of their home in Davidson County, Joe and Jackie argued again. The dispute stretched into the night, filled with words that can never be taken back. But instead of letting the anger fade, Joe chose a path of violence. At some point, he grabbed a hammer. In an act of cold brutality, he struck his wife, the woman he had lived with for nearly a quarter of a century. The blows ended Jackie's life. Joe did not call for help. He did not confess to anyone in those first hours. Instead, he tried to hide what he had done. He moved Jackie's body from their home and transported it to DeKalb County. There, he buried her in a shallow grave, attempting to conceal the evidence of his crime. When Jackie's children and family began asking questions, Joe created a lie. He told them that Jackie had been ill, that she was terminally sick, and that she had decided to leave. It was a cruel story, crafted to explain her sudden disappearance, but it did not add up. Jackie's family knew her. They knew she would never simply vanish. Their worry grew, and soon investigators were brought in. Detectives from the Metro Nashville Police Department began looking closely at Joe's story. It didn't take long for suspicion to form. His explanations were inconsistent. Forensic analysis and search efforts eventually uncovered the truth. Jackie's body was found buried in DeKalb County. The lie Joe had told his family crumbled, replaced by the harsh reality that he had killed his wife and tried to bury the evidence. When confronted with the truth, Joe admitted to what he had done. He acknowledged striking Jackie with a hammer and then hiding her body. His confession revealed not just the act of violence, but the disturbing coldness with which he attempted to erase it. The trial was devastating for Jackie's family. Prosecutors laid out the sequence of events, showing how Joe had turned from husband to killer, how he had tried to cover his tracks, and how he had lied to his own stepchildren to keep the secret. Family members gave emotional testimony about Jackie's life, her love, and the loss they would never recover from. In August of 2024, Joe Glynn pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. The plea avoided a lengthy trial, but it also confirmed the truth of his actions. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, a punishment that ensured he would never again live outside prison walls. For Jackie's family, the sentence brought justice, but not healing. Her children spoke of the heartbreak of losing their mother in such a brutal way, and of the betrayal of knowing it was her husband, someone meant to protect her, who had taken her life. Friends in her community mourned the gentle woman they had loved, struggling to understand how such cruelty could have grown in her own home. Today, Joe Glynn serves his life sentence in the Tennessee Department of Correction. He is an old man behind bars, his final years stripped of freedom. But for Jackie, for her family, and for her community, the damage was permanent. The murder of Jackie Glynn is a story of betrayal at its core. It is the story of a woman who gave 24 years of her life to a marriage, only to have it end in violence. It is a reminder that danger does not always come from strangers outside the home. Sometimes it comes from the very person who shares your bed, your meals, and your life. Number 2, Tyler Enix. Kimberly Enix was a devoted mother, a woman full of energy and love for her young daughter. Friends and co-workers in Knoxville, Tennessee, described her as kind, giving, and resilient. She had built a life focused on providing stability for her child, even as her marriage to Tyler Enix crumbled around her. Those close to Kimberly knew she had endured years of strain, and by 2015, the relationship had reached its breaking point. A divorce and separation were no longer just possibilities. They were necessities. But leaving was not easy. Anyone familiar with domestic violence knows that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she decides to leave. Kimberly understood this fear, yet she was determined to move forward with her life to create a safe environment for her daughter. Tyler, however, was not willing to let go. He had become increasingly possessive, his anger simmering beneath the surface. On October 5th, 2015, everything came to a devastating end. Kimberly was at home in Knoxville when Tyler arrived. What followed was not just an argument, but a brutal, frenzied attack. In a fit of rage, Tyler stabbed Kimberly 47 times. The violence of the assault stunned investigators and prosecutors later. 47 separate wounds, each one a mark of anger and control. The attack was so vicious that there was no doubt it had been intentional. The tragedy did not end there. After killing Kimberly, Tyler abducted their young daughter and fled. The little girl, already traumatized by the loss of her mother, was now in the hands of the man who had caused it. A statewide search was launched, with Amber Alerts issued in law enforcement agencies across Tennessee and beyond on high alert. The discovery of Kimberly's body horrified the community. Police found her lifeless in her home, the scene one of unimaginable violence. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers were devastated. Her absence from her workplace raised immediate concerns, and soon the reality became clear. Kimberly had been murdered by the very person she had once trusted most. The manhunt for Tyler stretched into neighboring states. Eventually, he was captured in Ohio after several days on the run. His arrest ended the search, but it could not undo the damage. The daughter was safely recovered, but she would grow up carrying the memory of what had happened to her mother. During interrogation, Tyler tried to claim the act had not been premeditated, suggesting it was a crime of passion, but the brutality of 47 stab wounds left little room for doubt. Prosecutors described him as a man unwilling to accept his wife's independence, a man who chose control and violence over love. The trial was long and painful. Jurors heard graphic testimony, including forensic evidence that documented the extent of Kimberly's injuries. Family members and friends testified about her fear of Tyler, about her hopes of breaking free, and about the life she wanted to build for her daughter. The courtroom was often overcome with emotion as the sheer weight of the case sank in. Ultimately, the jury convicted Tyler Enix of first-degree murder. The Tennessee Supreme Court later upheld the conviction, rejecting his appeals. He was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring he would never again walk free. Today, Tyler serves his sentence in the Tennessee Department of Correction. His daughter is being raised by Kimberly's family, surrounded by love but forced to grow up without her mother. The loss of Kimberly left a void that can never be filled, but her family continues to honor her memory, keeping her spirit alive through her daughter. The impact of Kimberly's murder rippled across Knoxville. It became a case often cited by domestic violence advocates, a reminder of how deadly these situations can become when intervention is too late. Kimberly's story is a sobering warning that behind closed doors, danger can be building quietly, and when it explodes, the consequences are devastating. The murder of Kimberly Enix is not just the story of a wife lost to domestic violence. It is the story of a mother who fought to protect her daughter, of a family shattered by betrayal, and of a community forced to reckon with the reality that love, when twisted by control and rage, can become deadly. Number 3, Victor E. Silvers. Brittany Silvers was a bright, ambitious young woman who served as a U.S. Army soldier stationed at Fort Campbell near Clarksville, Tennessee. She was 27 years old, dedicated to her career, and loved by her family and friends. Brittany had a smile that could light up a room, and those who knew her described her as strong, determined, and full of life. But behind her uniform and her strength, Brittany was also enduring a painful struggle at home. She had been married to Victor Silvers, but the marriage was rocky and filled with tension. Their relationship had deteriorated to the point that Brittany had sought protection through the courts. A restraining order was in place, forbidding Victor from being near her or contacting her. She had made it clear she wanted to live free of his control and his anger. But as with so many cases of domestic violence, leaving was not the end of the danger. It was the beginning of the most dangerous time. On the night of October 14th, 2018, Brittany was at her on-base residence when the nightmare she feared became reality. Victor drove from his home in Tennessee to Fort Campbell, violating the protective order. Consumed by rage and unwilling to accept the separation, he forced his way into Brittany's life one last time. Armed with a gun, he confronted her. What followed was a terrifying few moments of violence. Victor fired his weapon, striking Brittany 3 times. She collapsed, mortally wounded. Another man at the residence was also shot and injured, but Brittany did not survive. The discovery was immediate. Military police and emergency responders rushed to the scene after hearing gunfire. Brittany's body was found, and the chilling truth set in. She had been murdered in her own home, despite every effort she had made to protect herself. The protective order meant nothing to Victor in that moment, and the system that was supposed to shield her had failed. The investigation was swift. Law enforcement pieced together what had happened. A husband who ignored a court order, who drove to a military base with murder on his mind, and who carried out the very act Brittany had feared. Witness statements, forensic evidence, and Victor's own actions left no doubt about his guilt. Victor was arrested and charged. His demeanor during questioning revealed a man who tried to justify what he had done, but the evidence spoke louder than any words. Prosecutors made it clear this was not a crime of passion, but an act of premeditated violence. A soldier had been murdered in her own home by the very man she was trying to escape. The trial was harrowing. Family members testified about Brittany's strength, her determination, and her desire to live a life free from abuse. Fellow soldiers and friends spoke of her bright future, now cruelly stolen. Prosecutors emphasized the protective order and how Victor had violated it, turning a legal safeguard into a tragic piece of paper that couldn't stop a bullet. In 2023, Victor Silvers was convicted in federal court of first-degree murder, as well as additional charges for his actions that night. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, plus 10 additional years. It was a sentence that ensured he would never walk free again, but for Brittany's loved ones, it was cold comfort compared to the life that had been stolen. Today, Victor serves his sentence behind bars. He will never again harm Brittany or anyone else, but the pain of his actions continues to echo. Brittany's family and fellow soldiers carry the memory of her loss, a constant reminder of the dangers faced by women who try to break free from abusive relationships. The aftermath of Brittany's murder has become part of the broader conversation about domestic violence and military families. Her death is a reminder that protective orders, while vital, are only as strong as the systems that enforce them. Her courage in standing up for herself, in seeking protection, speaks to her strength as a woman and as a soldier. The murder of Brittany Silvers is the story of a life cut short by a husband's obsession and rage. It is a story of a family robbed of a daughter, a sister, and a friend. And it is a sobering warning about how far an abuser will go when control slips away. Brittany deserved freedom, she deserved safety, and above all, she deserved life. Number 4, Christopher Jones. Heather Palumbo Jones was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. At just 31 years old, she was a beloved kindergarten teacher at Fraser Elementary in Memphis, Tennessee. To her students, she was more than a teacher. She was a source of safety and joy. To her friends and family, Heather was vibrant, compassionate, and full of life. But behind her bright smile, Heather was struggling with a marriage that had grown increasingly toxic. She had married Christopher Jones, and for years they shared a home and raised 2 young children together. But the relationship was strained. Friends and co-workers recalled that Heather confided about verbal abuse, controlling behavior, and escalating arguments. By early 2013, she made the brave decision to separate from Christopher. She filed for divorce and was working to build a new life. Those closest to her later said she felt both relieved and afraid. Relieved at taking control of her future, but afraid of what her estranged husband might do. On the night of April 15th, 2013, Heather was last seen alive. She was upbeat, talking about her plans and her hope for the future. But in the early hours of April 16th, Christopher confronted her. What exactly happened behind closed doors may never be fully known, but what is certain is that Christopher's rage turned deadly. He attacked Heather, ending her life. Then, in an act of cruelty that shocked even seasoned investigators, he attempted to dispose of her remains. Christopher burned Heather's body and later buried what was left in a shallow grave in rural Shelby County. When Heather failed to show up for work on April 16th, alarm bells rang immediately. She was a dedicated teacher who never missed class. Colleagues at Fraser Elementary grew worried and called her family. Soon, a missing persons report was filed. The search began quickly and the community rallied together, hoping she might be found alive. But detectives had suspicions from the start. They knew Heather was in the middle of a divorce. They knew she had told friends she feared Christopher. And when investigators questioned him, his story shifted again and again. First, he claimed Heather had left voluntarily. Then he said she fell and hit her head. Eventually, he admitted to transporting her body. His conflicting accounts only deepened suspicion. Forensic evidence added to the case. Cadaver dogs alerted on Heather's vehicle, indicating the presence of human remains. Investigators uncovered physical proof of efforts to destroy evidence. Witnesses testified to hearing Christopher's threats and controlling behavior. Piece by piece, a picture formed of a man who could not accept losing control and who was willing to go to horrific lengths to silence his wife forever. Christopher was arrested and charged. During interrogation, he showed flashes of regret, but mostly concern for himself. Prosecutors later described him as cold, manipulative, and unwilling to take responsibility. The trial was heart-wrenching. Jurors heard from Heather's friends and family about the abuse she had endured and the fear she carried in the weeks before her death. Prosecutors laid out the gruesome details of how Christopher attempted to cover up the crime. The defense tried to argue it was not premeditated, but the brutality and deception convinced the jury otherwise. In the end, Christopher Jones was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 2 additional years for the abuse charge. The aftermath of Heather's murder devastated everyone who knew her. At Fraser Elementary, her students struggled to understand why their teacher never came back. A memorial garden was planted in her honor, a place where children and teachers could gather to remember her bright spirit. For her family, the pain was unbearable. They not only lost Heather, but were left to raise her 2 children who had lost both parents in one night, one to murder, the other to prison. Heather's story became a rallying cry for domestic violence awareness. Advocates pointed to her case as a reminder that leaving an abusive partner can be the most dangerous time for a woman. Her courage in seeking a new life was met with the ultimate betrayal, but her legacy lives on in the voices that now speak out to protect others. The murder of Heather Palumbo Jones is a chilling reminder of how love, when twisted by control and rage, can turn into something deadly. It is the story of a mother, a teacher, and a friend who deserved so much more, and of the man who chose to destroy her instead of letting her live free. But Christopher Jones was not finished fighting. After his conviction, he filed an appeal. His attorneys argued that errors had been made during his trial and that his conviction should be overturned. For Heather's family, it was painful to see the case dragged back into the spotlight. They had already endured the agony of her murder, and now they faced the possibility of her killer escaping accountability. In January of 2017, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals rejected his appeal. The judges reviewed the evidence, the trial proceedings, and his claims of error, but they found no grounds to overturn the verdict. They ruled that the trial had been fair and that the evidence against him was overwhelming. His life sentence, plus 2 years for abuse of a corpse, stood unchanged. Today, Christopher remains in a Tennessee prison. His appeals exhausted, his conviction final. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Heather's family, the denial of his appeal brought some measure of relief, confirmation that justice would remain intact. But no court ruling could undo the pain of losing her. Heather's legacy lives on in the children she taught, in the family who continues to honor her, and in the advocacy her story has inspired. She wanted freedom. She wanted peace. And though her life was stolen, her courage continues to remind others of the importance of speaking out and protecting those at risk of domestic violence. Number 5, Horace Andrew Tyler Nuñez. The Nuñez family lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and to neighbors they looked like any other young family trying to build a life. Their house was filled with the routines of parenthood, school drop-offs, grocery trips, and children playing in the yard. But behind closed doors, the marriage between Horace Andrew Tyler Nuñez and his wife was far from ordinary. Arguments simmered constantly, fueled by mistrust, resentment, and Tyler's volatile temper. Those who knew the victim described her as a dedicated mother who tried to shield her children from the conflict. She smiled through her struggles, making sure her kids felt love and stability, even as her marriage unraveled. But privately, she carried the burdens of living with a man whose anger grew more dangerous with time. Friends worried about her, sensing that something terrible was building, even if they couldn't imagine the horror that was to come. In January of 2021, that fear became reality. On a cold evening inside their Knoxville home, another argument erupted. What began with words escalated into shouting and then into violence. Tyler, consumed by rage, reached for a gun. In front of his children, he aimed the weapon at their mother. The children begged and screamed, but in a moment that would shatter their lives forever. Tyler pulled the trigger. Gunshots rang out, echoing through the house. Their mother collapsed to the floor, her life stolen in the very place she had tried to make safe for them. The house fell into chaos. The children's cries pierced the night, their innocence destroyed in an instant. Neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that shook even seasoned investigators. The young mother lay lifeless, and her children stood nearby, terrified, clinging to each other and to the officers who tried to comfort them. Through tears, one of them whispered the words no child should ever have to say, "Daddy killed Mommy." Detectives launched their investigation immediately. The evidence was overwhelming. The weapon used in the shooting was tied directly to Tyler. Ballistic analysis confirmed what the children had witnessed with their own eyes. Forensic teams documented the crime scene, while neighbors and relatives filled in the details of a household long marked by disputes. Every piece of evidence pointed to one conclusion. This was no accident. This was a deliberate act of violence carried out in front of his own children. Tyler was arrested soon after. During interrogation, his demeanor shifted between cold detachment and shallow attempts at remorse. He tried to explain the shooting away as an outburst, a moment of uncontrollable anger. But investigators saw through it. The decision to pick up a gun, aim it at his wife, and pull the trigger in front of their children could not be explained away as a mistake. It was a choice. The trial in Knox County was gut-wrenching. Prosecutors presented the evidence in detail, emphasizing the cruelty of a father killing his children's mother while they watched. The children's testimony, their recounting of what they saw and heard, left the courtroom in tears. Jurors heard how domestic disputes in the home had escalated, how Tyler's anger had turned into something deadly. The defense tried to argue that it was not premeditated, that it had happened in the heat of the moment. But the jury was unmoved. The brutality of the act, committed in front of innocent children, spoke for itself. In October of 2022, the verdict was delivered. Tyler was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with 4 counts of reckless endangerment for putting his children in harm's way. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, ensuring he would never again walk free. Today, Tyler remains behind bars in the Tennessee Department of Correction. His appeals have been unsuccessful. For his children, the sentence is both a relief and a curse. They are safe from their father, but they must grow up carrying the trauma of that night, the memory of their mother's final moments, and the knowledge that it was their father who took her away. The community of Knoxville was left reeling. Teachers, neighbors, and friends mourned the young mother, describing her as a woman who gave everything to her children. Her death became a rallying cry for domestic violence advocates, a reminder of how dangerous home can become when anger and abuse are left unchecked. The story of Horace Andrew Tyler Nuñez is one of betrayal at its most devastating. It is the story of children robbed of their mother, of a family torn apart, and of how unchecked rage can turn into irreversible tragedy. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous place is not the streets outside. It is within the home, at the hands of the person who was supposed to protect you. Number 6, Michael Allen Smith Sr. Christy Smith was a woman whose life revolved around her children. Living in Jackson, Tennessee, she was remembered as quiet, kind, and deeply devoted to her family. Friends described her as someone who would do anything for her kids, making sure they had stability even when her own life was filled with stress. To outsiders, she and her husband, Michael Allen Smith Sr., seemed like any other couple, but inside their Madison County home, their marriage had grown toxic. Arguments between them often dragged on for days, simmering with resentment and tension. By August of 2013, the fights had become unbearable. On August 9th, after yet another argument that had stretched for 2 long days, everything came to a breaking point. Michael, filled with rage, reached for a gun. In the presence of his children, he aimed the weapon at Christy and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot shattered the home, and in an instant, Christy's life was gone. The children were the first to react. Shocked, terrified, and overwhelmed, one of them would later tell police the haunting words no child should ever have to say, "Daddy killed Mommy." Their voices, innocent and broken, became a key part of the tragedy, leaving investigators no doubt about what had unfolded inside that house. Police were alerted to the home after a shots-fired call. When officers arrived, they found Christy's lifeless body and the children traumatized, clinging to each other. The officers on scene described it as one of the most heartbreaking sights they had encountered. A family home had turned into a crime scene, and the children had lost not just their mother, but also the sense of safety they once had. The investigation was swift. Forensic teams examined the weapon and tied it directly to Michael. Neighbors confirmed the heated arguments that had rattled the home in the days leading up to the murder. Witness accounts, combined with the children's testimony, painted a devastating picture of what had happened. A father consumed by anger who chose violence instead of restraint. Michael fled the home after the shooting, but his escape didn't last long. The next morning, law enforcement apprehended him. During questioning, he gave no clear justification for his actions. At times, he tried to downplay the incident, suggesting it wasn't planned, but nothing he said could explain away the fact that his wife was dead and his children had witnessed the murder. For Christy's family, the case was even more painful because of how it played out in court. Instead of being convicted directly of murder, Michael faced charges tied to his illegal possession of firearms. In August 2015, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of felony firearm possession in connection with the killing. And in March 2016, he was sentenced in federal court to the maximum penalty available on those charges, 10 years in prison. To many, it felt like a miscarriage of justice. A mother had been brutally taken from her children, and yet her husband would serve only a decade behind bars. Christy's relatives expressed frustration, feeling that the punishment did not match the crime. 10 years behind prison walls could never compare to the lifetime of grief Christy's children would carry. Today, Michael Allen Smith Sr. has served his time in federal custody. But even as he moves through the system, the scars remain. His children grew up without their mother, carrying memories of the night that changed everything. They also grew up knowing their father, the man meant to protect their family, was the one responsible for destroying it. The community of Jackson has not forgotten Christy. To this day, she is remembered as a kind woman whose life ended far too soon. Her case serves as a painful reminder that domestic disputes, if left unchecked, can spiral into unthinkable violence. And it also serves as a reminder of how justice can sometimes feel incomplete, leaving families searching for answers that the courts cannot fully provide. The story of Christy Smith is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of children left behind, of a family fractured beyond repair, and of a justice system that did not seem to fully match the weight of the crime. It is a cautionary tale about anger, about the hidden dangers within a troubled marriage, and about how one moment of violence can leave wounds that last for generations. Number 7, Randall Neece. Lakeisha Neece was only 27 years old when her life was cut short in Kingsport, Tennessee. She was remembered as vibrant, loving, and full of dreams for her future. Friends said she had an infectious laugh, the kind of smile that lifted those around her. She loved deeply and cared for her family with everything she had. But inside her marriage to Randall Neece, life was anything but joyful. Tension and arguments had become part of her daily reality, and those close to her worried about the toll it was taking. By January of 2018, the marriage had deteriorated beyond repair. On the night of January 7th, inside their Rock Springs home, another argument broke out. This time, it did not stop with raised voices. It spiraled into a nightmare. Investigators later learned that Randall first tried to smother Lakeisha with a shower curtain. When that failed, he grabbed a hair straightener cord and wrapped it around her neck. He pulled tightly, strangling her until the life drained from her body. Strangulation is one of the most intimate and brutal forms of murder, requiring force over time. It is not quick. It is not accidental. It is deliberate. And in those final moments, Lakeisha fought for her life, but she could not overcome the rage and control of the man who once vowed to love her. The following morning, her absence was impossible to ignore. Family members and neighbors who had worried about the couple grew suspicious when they could not reach her. Police were called to the home, and what they found was devastating. Lakeisha's body lay lifeless, signs of a violent struggle surrounding her. A place meant to be her refuge had become the scene of her murder. Detectives immediately knew they were dealing with a homicide. The investigation moved quickly. Randall's story shifted during questioning, but the forensic evidence told the truth. Strangulation marks on Lakeisha's neck matched the hair straightener cord found inside the house. He admitted to investigators that he had tried first with the shower curtain, then with the cord. His confession showed not just violence, but persistence, a chilling determination to end her life. For Lakeisha's family, the details were unbearable. The thought of her final moments pleading, struggling, fighting to breathe, haunted them. It wasn't just that she had been murdered, it was how personal, how cruel the act had been. He hadn't used a weapon from outside the home. He had used everyday household items, things meant for comfort and care, turning them into tools of death. The trial began in 2022, and the courtroom was filled with grief. Prosecutors laid out the evidence step by step, showing how Randall's actions proved intent. They reminded the jury that strangulation is not an accident, that it requires time and decision. They pointed out that Randall had multiple opportunities to stop, but he didn't. Instead, he tried again and again until Lakeisha was gone. Family members spoke of their loss, painting a picture of the woman Lakeisha was, the daughter, the sister, the friend whose life had been stolen. Randall's defense tried to argue that it wasn't premeditated, that it happened in the heat of the moment. But the jury did not believe it. The sequence of attempts, first with the curtain and then with the cord, showed more than a passing impulse. It showed intent and determination. In April of 2022, the verdict was delivered. The jury found Randall Neece guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Lakeisha's family, the sentence brought justice, but it could not heal the wound. They had lost her forever. Today, Randall remains in the Tennessee Department of Correction, serving his life sentence. He will never again walk free, but Lakeisha's family is left with memories and grief that time cannot erase. Her friends continue to remember her laugh, her warmth, and the bright future she never got to see. The impact of Lakeisha's murder rippled through Kingsport. Neighbors spoke of how quickly anger can turn deadly, and advocates for domestic violence used her story to highlight the warning signs that must never be ignored. Lakeisha's death became part of a larger conversation about the dangers women face when trapped in abusive relationships. Her story is heartbreaking because it is so human. She was a young woman trying to live her life, a woman who deserved safety and love. Instead, she faced betrayal and violence from the person she trusted most. The story of Lakeisha Neece is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger is not outside the home. It is the person waiting inside it. Number 8, Roy Ezell Jones. Juanita Jones was 49 years old, a woman remembered for her kindness, her quiet strength, and her devotion to her family. She lived in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee, with her husband, Roy Ezell Jones. To neighbors and acquaintances, they seemed like an ordinary couple navigating life's struggles. But inside their home, their marriage was fraught with arguments, bitterness, and Roy's rising temper. Those close to Juanita later said she tried to keep the peace, often focusing on her children as her anchor. Yet, she lived under the heavy weight of conflict. On one evening in 2022, the tension erupted into unthinkable violence. Juanita and Roy were in the middle of another heated argument, one of many that had punctuated their relationship. But this time, Roy escalated the fight in the worst possible way. He reached for a gun. In a single, life-altering decision, he pulled the trigger. The sound of gunfire shattered the home. Juanita fell, struck by bullets fired by the man she had once trusted with her life. The horror of the moment was magnified by the fact that their child was present. That child saw their mother collapse, and their father standing over her, holding the weapon that had taken her life. In the chaos, the child would later tell investigators the chilling truth: Daddy killed Mommy. The words, spoken with the innocence of youth, carried a weight that no child should ever have to bear. Police rushed to the home after neighbors reported hearing gunfire. When they entered, they were met with a heartbreaking scene. Juanita lay lifeless, and her child stood nearby, traumatized, clinging to what little sense of safety they could find. Officers described the atmosphere as haunting, the kind of crime scene that stays with you forever. Detectives from the Shelby County District Attorney's Office quickly began piecing together what had happened. The evidence was overwhelming. The weapon recovered at the scene was linked directly to Roy. Ballistics confirmed the shots that killed Juanita had come from his gun. Forensic teams reconstructed the events inside the home, and everything pointed back to Roy as the shooter. The investigation also revealed the history of domestic disputes within the household. Friends, neighbors, and family members spoke of a relationship defined by anger and conflict. a relationship where it seemed only a matter of time before things turned violent. This wasn't a sudden, random act. It was the tragic culmination of years of arguments that escalated too far. Roy was arrested and interrogated. During questioning, his statements shifted. At times, he admitted his role. At times, he tried to justify it, and at times, he seemed to show sorrow. But prosecutors later described his remorse as shallow, noting that he appeared more concerned about his own fate than the devastation he had caused. The trial in Shelby County was heartbreaking. Prosecutors laid out the case step by step, emphasizing the cruelty of killing one's spouse in front of a child. The child's testimony, combined with the forensic evidence, made the picture painfully clear. Juanita had been murdered in cold blood inside her own home, with her child forced to bear witness. The defense attempted to argue that the killing had not been premeditated, that it was the result of a heated argument spiraling out of control. But the jury was not swayed. The deliberate choice to pick up a firearm and fire it at Juanita was undeniable. The act might have happened in the midst of anger, but it was intentional nonetheless. In July of 2025, the verdict was read. Roy Ezell Jones was found guilty of second-degree murder. The conviction ensured he would spend decades in prison, separated from the family he had destroyed. For Juanita's loved ones, it brought justice, but not healing. Nothing could bring her back. Today, Roy remains in a Tennessee prison, serving his sentence. His child, left without both parents in one night, is now in the care of relatives. The child's life will forever carry the scars of that evening, the memory of losing their mother and watching their father taken away in handcuffs. Juanita's family continues to grieve, remembering her as a woman who gave selflessly to those around her. They speak of her laughter, her warmth, and her love for her children. Her friends and neighbors remember her as someone who deserved so much more than the fate she met. The murder of Juanita Jones is a story of betrayal, of violence within the home, and of the devastating impact domestic abuse can have on entire families. It is a tragedy that reminds us how quickly an argument can become deadly when anger is left unchecked. And it is a sobering lesson that the scars of such violence do not end with the victim. They ripple outward, affecting children, families, and entire communities for generations. If this case moved you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another true crime story. What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters and helps keep these conversations alive. And remember, domestic violence destroys families every day. If you or someone you know is in danger, please reach out to a local hotline or support service. By supporting the Unforeseen Fates channel, you are also helping us continue to shed light on these tragedies and give a voice to the victims who can no longer speak for themselves.